Recently, there's been a lot of conversation about AI and unemployment. Much needed conversation, to be honest, and much overdue about AI and job loss. But simultaneously, very few people seem to be talking about the opposite trend, which is equally real or at least equally possible, and that is AI and job gain, AI and re-employment, AI and its ability to bring people into the economy with more meaningful, more fulfilling work. I want to spend a few minutes and provide a little bit of a counterbalance here. So think about grannies. Think about millions and millions of wonderfully warm and absolutely cognitively able grandmas and grandpas that currently are locked away essentially in the old people's homes, in the care facilities, even though they are absolutely capable of providing so much needed warmth and wisdom to, for example, the young generation. The problem is that they're physically incapable of providing childcare anymore. They cannot chase that 3-year-old, when it's trying to run into a busy road or whatever. They cannot bring them physically to the bathroom. But imagine that we actually could pair these grannies with the muscle that they lack in the form of a humanoid robot. All of a sudden, the equation changes. Because you have a human with a lot of warmth and wisdom to give. You have the grandma who would sit with the 3-year-old and the 2-year-old and the 1-year-old for hours and hours and read them the stories and hug them and all the other good stuff that we so much miss. And at the same time, that granny could command the muscle, right, in the form of the robot. This is so much better than obviously the robot alone trying to look after the kids, which I don't think is going to happen soon. But together they can actually be a wonderful pair providing that childcare. And then think about at the scale of the economy what that kind of thing would do, right? You have millions and millions of people who are re-entering the workforce, providing a really meaningful care. And you have the parents who all of a sudden now feel good about their kids sort of staying at home with a real human with warmth and the time. And then you think about what happens with those parents realizing that the cost of childcare, of meaningful, good childcare, is dropping. And so all of a sudden, maybe they would want to have more kids, or maybe they would want to have more fulfilling careers, right? So it trickles down, not to mention the wonderful effect that would have on the grandmas and grandpas themselves, because they would be able to give back. And, there's plenty of psychological literature and longevity literature that shows that this ability to reconnect back with society, to give back, is actually what matters so much to people across all life stages, but particularly as you grow older. So you may say, "Wow, that's it's a profound example, but it's quite a few years ahead, and in the meantime, it's all the office jobs that are disappearing." Well, I think you could look for examples that are much more near term. Think about a trained doctor, let's say, or a teacher who had to change countries. And all of a sudden, they're locked out of the workforce for the very silly reason that they just don't speak the language of their new country. And so they end up, washing the dishes, which technically they're employed, but are they doing the most that they could do for society? Are they really becoming the best version of themselves for both their own self-fulfillment and the economic output? I don't think so. All of a sudden, with real-time audio translation now being available, or almost available with AI, they can go back and provide the much needed healthcare or teaching or whatever it is that they're good at. And it's going to be better for them, and it's going to be better for the economy of the country that became their home, right? So I think if you think about the people who are currently basically locked out of providing their best possible contribution to the economy, and how by pairing them with AI, either companions or technologies, we can actually unlock all of that latent possibility that is definitely there and that is dying to come out. You could actually not just create jobs, but you could create more fulfilling jobs, more meaningful jobs, the jobs that will create more value both for the humans doing them and for the humans at a wider scale of the economy. And this brings us nicely to the larger question that we really need to think about as a society, which is, as we're going through the next 5, 10, 15 years of labor transition, what are we trying to optimize for? What are we trying to preserve? What are we trying to increase? What are we trying to create? And I think we will make a massive mistake if we try to keep using the same old crude measures, such as basic unemployment rate, to think about this transition. Because measuring basic unemployment rate would force us into saying, look, AI is displacing jobs. Let's make sure that people still have jobs, even if the jobs that are created as a result are still bullshit jobs. Using David Graeber's language, if those jobs are not meaningful, but we preserve them at all costs artificially, is that actually a good way for us to go through this transition? And again, I think healthcare actually provides a great analogy space for us to think about this. In healthcare, they've been battling with a similar type of question for the last, at least 50 years, openly, probably more. And the question is, you had the old crude measure of success in healthcare, which is lifespan or mortality in the hospitals, right? It's a simple thing, right? Did the patient die or did they not die today? And you have the healthcare system, which is optimized for basically making sure that people don't die for as long as possible. But over the last 50 years, there's been an ongoing debate. Look at Nolan's book, How We Die, and everything else that followed. There's been intense debate about whether this is the right thing for our healthcare system to be optimizing for. And I think anybody who thinks about this, in a humane way, realizes that you cannot just optimize for reducing mortality. That's not the humane way of thinking about this. A practical example is, let's say you have somebody who is terminally ill, and you have two options. You can provide them with a year of really good quality of life, relatively pain-free, that they can spend at home and, maintaining meaningful connections with their family, all of that. Or you can give them a chance for maybe, 1 year and 2 months. But all of that period is going to be very, very miserable and full of pain, and they're going to go through unnecessary rounds of chemo, and it will just be a drag, and it will cost like 10 times more. The ultimate example is keeping people alive on ventilators for a long time, just because technically they're still alive, the heart is beating, so you're reducing mortality. But are you actually increasing anything good here? And I think more and more healthcare systems are going to through this realization and starting to put that in practice, that what you're optimizing for is not just mortality. You're optimizing for some sort of a quality of life, a long time measure. There are different ways of measuring it, but one is QALY, quality adjusted life years, right? So that's a way of reasoning, of measuring and saying, look, 1 year of full capacity and living with a family is worth more than 1.2 years of misery and pain. That's a very similar, I think, logic to what we have to go through now with jobs. Like, are all jobs equal? Is all work time equal? And there are lots of studies showing that, when you're doing the work that is not meaningful, that is not fulfilling, you suffer. And you suffer long-term and short-term. Simply the fact that somebody has a job and is paid a minimum wage, that's we can do better than that, as something that we optimize for. So what would be an alternative? I think something like what I call meaning adjusted work days could be a better measure that we could optimize for. Now, what I mean by that? Well, I think, at the end of the day, we all know that when we go to bed at night, we go, well, this was a good day. It doesn't mean that it was an easy day. It doesn't mean that, I spent all of it watching TV. It means that the work that I did today was good and meaningful, and I feel that contribution matters to me and to others, potentially. And so if you think about a career, roughly 10,000 days, if you work for 40 years, or maybe it's going to be extended, so 15,000 days. My question is, how many of those days are going to be meaningful to you, right? If you do the same kind of meaning score, like 1, it was a great meaningful day, and then 0.1 is the day when you did something that is a bullshit job that you just didn't need to do, you didn't feel good about doing, and nobody benefited from it, really. That's how we should think. A 0.1 MAWD type of day is wasted, right? So how many of the 15,000 days that you have in your career do you classify as meaningful? And yes, this is subjective, and I think that is the point, that this is largely subjective, because we're optimizing for human flourishing. So instead of just measuring in a binary way, like are you employed or are you not employed, we should be, I think, measuring and optimizing both at the scale of firms and at the scales of societies for something like meaning adjusted work days, right? Was it a full-on meaningful work day where you provided care for somebody who needed it, did some deep work that you really care about? Then that's a 1. Did you spend the full day submitting useless forms? Then that's a 0.1 of a day. And so how do you maximize over the course of a lifetime the number of meaning adjusted work days that actually mattered? Another thing that happens if you move from just measuring unemployment to measuring meaning adjusted work days is that we could actually start to get real about all the work that currently does not count as employment and is not necessarily compensated, but is really meaningful and important work. Right? Let's talk about childcare that people provide at home while they're not technically working. Let's talk about elderly care. Let's talk about all the other things, including public service and volunteering, that currently does not really count as work, even though we all know that it is work, that it is hard, that it is meaningful, that it is important, and very often more important than what is classified as work, just because somebody gets a salary for it and technically counts as being employed. So that's another part of going through this transition. We need to redefine what work is. And what it means to actually be a member of the economy towards something more realistic and more aligned with what actually matters to people. And I think if we start optimizing for something like that, we get to a very, very different equation, both in terms of thinking about AI and jobs that we want to potentially replace, and then jobs that we want to create, and the re-employment and the grandmas and grandpas that we're willing to bring back into the workforce, and making sure that we maximize for human flourishing and fully expressing your capacity. And this is not a new idea. This is really an old Greek idea of a life well lived is a life where you expressed your full capacity to the fullest degrees. So yeah, that's a thought for you, to think about. Is unemployment really the thing that we care about, or should we be optimizing for something more meaningful? Should we try to create the future through this transition that 15 years from now we'll look back and say, wow, now a lot more of the work we do, a lot more of the days that we go through actually feel like we've done something good. Something worthy, something that was not a waste of our time on this earth. And I think if we try to optimize for that at every level, then not only will we increase productivity, right? And I don't want this to sound like UBI, not necessarily. No, I think when people are doing meaningful jobs, they're more engaged. They have more, using Daniel Pink's system, more autonomy, more mastery, more purpose. They're more productive. They're going to be doing more meaningful things for their firms, for the economy. And for themselves. So this really is just an exploration and an invitation for you to think a little bit differently about this transition, about AI and jobs. And there are 2 key parts, right? One is, as people are talking about job loss, let's think about job gain. Let's see the opportunities for creating more meaningful, more fulfilling work, for bringing more people back into the workforce, for allowing people to contribute more meaningfully, so lifting them up in the workforce for increasing productivity, because it will inevitably increase productivity if you actually have people who pour their hearts and souls and feel like the work is purposeful and meaningful and fulfilling. So that's one, right? Let's see the opportunity here, and as entrepreneurs, as business people, as governments, I think maximizing that is going to be important. And two, let's think about a better way for us to measure our progress towards the future economy that's actually going to be meaningful. And my suggestion here is to come up with a measure that is better than pure unemployment, because my argument is pure unemployment is a terrible measure of whether we're utilizing the collective human capacity and compensating humans for fulfilling their capacity at the scale of the economy, at the scale of the firm, at the scale of the individual. Let us try to optimize not for, how many days did we get people paid for, but how many meaningful days did we create? And that's, generally speaking, I think a really good thing to optimize for, both in your life and in your firm, and ultimately as governments are trying to navigate the transition into the future of economy where we share the workforce with the AIs and the robots. We need to make sure that everybody gets the most out of it rather than the least.